Men use this power play over women. We're going to dive into this conversation today. And I'm really excited to have our guest, Shannon Ryan, who's a certified financial planner in the house. We're going to talk about money today because money tends to be a contentious area in relationships. So welcome, Shannon.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's so good to be here with you.
Yeah. So, we were sharing before, and I was talking about how I believe 50% of divorces cite money as the primary cause for their ending. I mean, I don't know if that's exactly right, but I'm sure you come across this a lot in your practice. So let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah, it's actually a little lower than 50%, but what's startling is it's actually third after just not being compatible, infidelity, and then money. And so it's those are the big three. Everything else trails by many, many points behind. So that is one of the big three.
Yeah. Well, and I know we oftentimes talk on my channel about sex and intimacy as being the challenge, but money is our capacity to support ourselves. It's our capacity to entertain one another. And certainly we've used this title. It says men use this power play over women. And oftentimes money is that power play that some men can use in relationship. And I think you've experienced that. And I was hoping maybe you could lean into that conversation with everybody.
It's interesting. Money is used as power by men and women these days. And so money is one of those topics that we can use. I was saying before we got started that money is primal. It is, as we feed ourselves and clothe ourselves, but it's also how we view people in society. We view people that have done incredibly well. How did they do it? How did they get there? We read their books, we look at the biographies. So money is one of those very deeply rooted pain points for us in society. Because of that, if we make a lot of money, then we feel like we have power sometimes over other people. And it's used by men in dating because traditionally men have been looked at as the providers. And now as we see more and more women leading households and some men staying home raising the kids now and making that decision together, we're starting to see it shift a little bit, that women have also used money as a power play.
Oh, really? Well, that's interesting. Well, I'm trying to think if I've ever really experienced that. I mean, I personally haven't, but well, God, I'm throwing my younger brother under the bus, but his wife is the primary breadwinner in the house. And I know he's felt a sense of, well, I don't think he'd use the word emasculation, but I would say that I would think if he was being honest with you, he might even say that that is somewhat of a challenge in their dynamic because of that. And not that there's anything wrong with it, kind of thing. Well, I mean, with her making more is what I mean.
The fact, Jonathan, you even have to say that there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, the reality is that we live in a society that traditionally men are expected to provide. So when a woman earns more, and often in those relationships, because I have spent 30 years with real people behind closed doors. So I know there's a lot of relationships where women are out earning men. What I find is the women will downplay that in public. They would never say anything. They don't want to demasculate their husbands or their partners because of it. But why do we live in a society that even would say that that man isn't worth like as much of another man because his wife is out earning him? So it takes a very strong man. There's been years that I've out earned my husband. There's been years he's out earned me. And I will tell you, he loves it the years that I out earn him because he feels he's got a very strong partner. But that's not something I think you would go out into society and announce at a dinner party either because of all the judgment.
Yeah. Well, as you were sharing that, and I want to come back to primal in a moment, but I want to touch upon something because I know I hear from women how they've been women who are successful, financially successful, and they've said they've been with men who have felt intimidated by that. Yes. And this comes back to a conversation we briefly, or actually it was the TED Talk I watched of yours. And by the way, everybody, I'll post a link to Shannon's TED Talk because this is what prompted me to even reach out to you, centered around money wounds. In other words, an emotional wound that's triggered by money. And I was hoping maybe we could lean into that for the next 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah. So, it's interesting after all of these years of sitting, and I always say that I don't report on money. I don't go out and research money, although I do report on it and I do write
Yeah.
on it and I do research it. But what I really do, and I've done it for 30 years, is I sit across from real people and I hear their stories. And when the door closes and the
Okay.
emotions open up, what I started to see early in my career was I started to call them financial wounds. And then I moved my terminology to financial scar tissue. What I've
Okay.
learned is as I worked with people, I started to notice patterns, verbal patterns, money disorders, money fears. And it seemed, you wonder where they're coming from. Why do they feel like they can't spend money here? Or why do they feel inadequate because they're not earning at a certain level or their spouse is out earning them? And what I found after starting to ask more in-depth questions about it was that it stemmed back typically either to the family of origin, what they experienced in their family growing up, the money dynamic with their parents,
Yeah.
the community that they grew up, the culture that they grew up in, or really traumatic experiences that they had along the way.
Yeah.
2008, you and I were talking about that earlier, early 2000s. These things that happen in life that leave a wound, and even after they've healed. And that's why I call it scar tissue, because sometimes the events are long forgotten. But when that
Mhm.
wound gets hit in the form of a scar tissue, we
Yeah.
react and sometimes overreact to
Yeah.
money or to our spouse or people we care about and not even know why we're having that emotional response. And that's why I call it scar tissue, because it
Yeah.
remains with us throughout our lives. We just have to learn to live with it.
Well, it's interesting as you're sharing this. I have a public share to make, and maybe I'd like your perspective on this as well. So I remember when my father was probably mid 50s, late 60s, and I was probably, I'm going to guess 10, 12 in that age range. I can't remember exactly. Um, my father got laid off.
Mm.
And I can remember the tension in the house at
Mhm.
that time. I mean, I remember that it was like a big, gigantic crisis going on, and he was scrambling, And by the way, my heritage is Turkish, by the way, just to give you some context. And both my parents are from Istanbul. I was born here in the United States. And I have a real strong memory of that. My father, picked up his britches and he was able to find. He took a job in Saudi Arabia, by the way,
Yeah.
or he took a job here in the United States that sent him to Saudi Arabia, where he actually, for about 3 or 4 years, earned a living there, pretty nice living at that time, but all of it was tax free
Mhm.
back then. So he
Mhm.
was able to sock, and they paid for all the expenses. So literally, he was able to sock away. Fast forward to 2008, I had went through a divorce. I lost my high-end corporate job and I got wiped out in the market crash. I mean, talk about the big three kind of thing.
Mm.
And my identity was shattered. I
Yeah.
mean, on so many different levels, because there was, losing money,
Yep.
losing your job, and then losing your spouse in a way. I was in like the perfect storm to be, and I would say I still carry deep scars over that.
I'm sure you do. I can't imagine, Jonathan, that you wouldn't. And those scars started observing your father's reaction to
Yeah.
his job loss. But you can't blame your father, but I wouldn't blame your father. Your father
Oh, no,
was
no, no. I don't blame my father.
I'm saying that some people say, oh, my father reacted the wrong way and we saw it as his children, but he's a man who had a
Yeah.
family and who lost his job. And the
Yeah.
emotional response in the family, as children, we see our parents' emotional responses, whether they are sitting at the kitchen table crying over it and making sure that we all feel stressed or trying to hide it. Our kids feel our emotional
Yeah.
responses. So you fast forward, you had already those wounds of watching your father, who you love dearly, go through that kind of pain
Yeah.
and then experiencing it for yourself. But you lost your job. And in 2008 was a difficult time to lose your job because the market was down. So not only
Yeah.
did you lose your job, but you lost equity investments that were your safety net. Safety net's gone,
Yeah.
spouse is gone. It's something that a lot of people, Jonathan, don't come back from. So,
Yeah.
and it's something that's probably going to carry with you for the rest of your life. You're going to have to continue to reframe it as a focal point of strength. You got through it, you moved on, you're at a beautiful place now, but it's something that's a part of who you are. And when you have reactions to money, you just have to remember that you have a wound there
Yeah.
and make a good decision anyways.
Well, I mean, I'll be candid with you. For about a half decade, drugs and alcohol is how I got through the day. I mean, it was a very there was a period of time where I used to go to bed wishing I didn't wake up. It was that painful. And sadly, my children witnessed this. So just like I witnessed my parents, unfortunately, my children witnessed what was going on between us in that regard. And that was, I mean, it's taken me a lot of crawling through the mud to get to the place I'm at. And since we're talking about dating and relationships, I'm very upfront in the very early stages of getting to know someone.
Yeah.
This is my experience and this is where I'm at, because I don't want to, because, well, okay, I'd love your perspective on this. You know, I was a tail end baby boomer, Gen Xer. You know, I was raised with go to college, get a job, meet someone, get married, buy a house, start a family. You get it, right? I mean, okay. Yeah. And particularly my job is the provider protector. And to some degree, even 20 years after this or 17 plus years since all that went down, I feel like my legs have been cut off. Like I'm still walking on from my knees, not from my full, you know, power, if you will. And while I know our title is about men who use it as a power play, we're kind of leaning into the other side, how a lot of men struggle in this area, particularly in romantic love because of this. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
I do. I actually think you're speaking about the power play too, because let me give you the opposite of what you just described. And thank you for being so candid, because this is what I love. And Jonathan, most people don't get to see this side of what you just shared, because most people won't talk about this in public. And this is so incredibly important. You're really helping people. This is what I hear every day sitting in my office.
Okay, so you get it.
I get it, but most people aren't willing to talk about it on, on podcasts. So this is great. The opposite side of that is somebody who has earned at such a high level that they feel they're entitled to do anything. Have affairs, run over people, keep the little woman at home, keep her happy. I mean, who cares what I do? She can buy whatever she wants. So there's two sides to this. And unfortunately, what you went through is the harder side, because the people in our society that have the money, that's who we revere. They're the providers. And it's interesting because I also hear, being a woman, I hear women all the time is, I married the first time for love. The second time I'm going for money. And I think, well, let's be careful while you're doing that, because it's a double-edged sword. I think that what you building yourself back up, I think your wound is not only what you went through. I mean, you had you got knocked down hard. Yeah. And that's life. Unfortunately, you got knocked down really hard, and it's not unusual. Most people will numb to a certain degree, whether it be, drugs, alcohol, TV, sex, people numb. And so,
by the way, really quickly, online dating was my other drug of choice, which eventually became it turned out to be my savior, just to let you know, but it was my other drug of choice.
Well, thank goodness it was, because here you are helping everyone else. So that's thank goodness. So from the ashes, right? Yeah. But I do think that there's two sides of this, and I'm not saying that everything is an extreme. We can run down the middle of this as well. But I don't think we need to be careful about idolizing those that are making a really high income as well, and thinking that they've got it all together, that they don't have wounds. People who have a lot of money, and I sit across the table from them every day as well, have tremendous amount of wounds as well. And some of them can't even enjoy it, because it is who they are. They can be workaholics. They're not present for their partners, because their only worth is what they earn to their family. And so they become absentee as well. So I think the key here is to, as you're dating and as you're coming into a relationship, having these kind of conversations up front and really walking through. And I love that you're candid about your journey, because I think when you're dating, Jonathan, that's going to be a hard thing up front in our society to say, listen, I got knocked down. Yeah. Because I'm sure you've had some women that have walked away. Well, you were knocked down, and you're not at the financial level that I want you to be at, and you're admitting this, where they could be talking to somebody else. They could be lying through their teeth and have all these wounds and have nothing. So I think that you're coming from a place that is authentic. And I think that makes a huge difference. But we've got the entire spectrum as human beings. Hopefully by this point in our lives, we've had a lot of life experiences. But with that comes a lot of experience around money. But money is a tool that is used for good and used for for bad. So it's
Yeah.
something that needs to be talked about.
Well, this comes back to the thumbnail for this video is women give their power away oftentimes. And I kind of almost want to go back to that primal conversation we had, because it's interesting as I kind of wear my time machine hat, I kind of envision what it might have been like for cave people, for example. I mean, I actually do these kind of meditations. And like hoarding resources, like, okay, I've got my buffalo, I'm going to keep it to my, or whatever animal was back then, and I'm going to hoard that because that's my resource. And to some degree, there's this, particularly I think in cases where resources is part of our survival, if you will, and the more resources we have, if your capacity to generate resources dependent upon somebody else, well, you could find yourself in a really precarious position, whether it's somebody who might be egotistical, narcissistic, selfish in that regard, or God forbid, there's an exit for whatever reason, the person loses their job, and all of a sudden you find yourself, you're 45 years old, you haven't worked, you haven't created even an opportunity for one to generate their own resources. And I know you have a lot to say about that.
I do. So I grew up in a household where my father was a surgeon, and I
Okay.
never thought he made a lot of money because I've been working since I've been 16 years old. But
Okay.
here's what I remember, because he was very tight with money, is that my father was, after when my mom and dad were going through a divorce,
Okay.
I remember I was standing, and I talk about this in the opening chapter of my new book coming out. I was standing in a hamburger stand ordering a hamburger. And I had asked my mom, can I place this order? And I'm 6 feet tall. I can't see how tall I am, but I'm 6 feet tall. I was skinny. I was starving. I'd just come off the beach from doing junior lifeguards. And I was in my brain calculating, oh my gosh, what can I order to fill myself up, but not cost mom too much? And after I figured out what I wanted to order, I asked my mom, is it okay if I order this? And the guy behind the counter said, oh my gosh, your daughter is so polite. And in my head, I was screaming, I'm not polite. I'm terrified. I'm terrified we're going to be homeless. I'm terrified we're going to run out of money. I'm terrified my dad's going to go bankrupt, because my parents were in such a deep, ugly divorce, and money was being used as the weapon. And so my dad was telling my mom every day we didn't have enough money. My mom was telling me that, well, dad's not giving us enough. So, and he's saying we have to go bankrupt. So it was so difficult. Fast forward, I start dating my husband, who I've now been married to for 35 years.
Okay.
And at 24 years old, when we were talking about getting married, I'm so grateful that I had the wherewithal at 24. I sat down with my husband and said, listen, I have some wounds.
Yeah.
And I believe you're going to be a great provider. He had a good education. He wanted to provide for me. But here's my wound. I will always provide as well. Because my learning as growing up was, if I don't keep control, meaning my ability to earn an income, what if you lose your job? Meaning we've got to support each other. So if you don't want a woman that's going to work outside of the home, I'm not your partner, because I'm going to, and I'm not going to give up that power. And I also don't want you to ask me if this is a new pair of shoes that I'm wearing and how much they cost. Meaning if we take care of all the bills, I want to have some financial freedom on my own.
Yeah.
He agreed to that, thank goodness. And it's been the foundation of how we've worked together. But my husband also came out of a very impoverished family. And he just wanted to know that every credit card was paid off at the end of the month, because they carried credit card bills and that hung over them. So it's power from my childhood, or the weaponization from my childhood, created who I am financially. And so I desired a partnership. There's a lot of women who really do want and fundamentally believe that men should be the one who are taking care of everything and paying for everything.
Yeah.
And Jonathan, there's nothing wrong. We all have to be honest with what we want in our lives. However, you just hit the nail on the head. What people don't think about is some of these folks that have what appear to be a large amount of resources, that doesn't mean those resources can't disappear. So and I've seen it happen multiple times. So if you're marrying or dating based on the resources that that person has, I think you may be setting yourself up for problems.
Yeah, I've witnessed that too often, where again, and this probably goes to a dependency to some degree, when you're dependent on someone financially, which is really the core basis of our survival. I mean, we don't go out with bow and arrows anymore and hunt animals or build our log cabin or that sort of thing. To some degree, our money is a resource, and God forbid you putting that expectation on someone else, then you're literally to some degree giving your livelihood, or as the subtitle says, our power away to another person in that particular case. Oh, can I tell you a funny little story? It's in the same vein, but I share this story because it's something I experienced dating about 10 years ago. And I had a first date with a gal, and we went to the bullpen, by the way. Do you know the bullpen in Redondo Beach?
Of course.
By the way, for those of us locals, it's kind of a little bit of a dive bar, not a total dive bar. We went for Halloween, and I remember we got dressed up. It was our first date. And I paid for a round of drinks, and it was time for the second round of drinks. And she pulls out her credit card, and I said, "No, I've got it." And she goes, "No, I've got it." And I go, "No, I got it." And she goes, "No, I've got it."
Yeah.
And some would say that she was in her masculine energy, like there's some sort of something wrong with being generous, as like I don't, I didn't, some people would criticize that. But what she did next, Shannon, she put her hand on my arm, looked me in the eye, and said, "Jonathan, I really appreciated that you treated the first round of drinks. Will you allow me to show you my appreciation by treating you, because I think you're worth it?"
Yeah.
And my chin dropped. I mean, I literally dropped. And in that moment, you know what I said? This is a woman who could be a partner in my life. I mean, I thought about a partnership skill. And what was interesting, and while that relationship didn't last very long, we were only together for 3 months. It was funny because we used to just take turns in treating. It was almost like, "No, it's my turn. No, it's my turn." Because it came from a place of generosity and not expectation. And I can tell you, as a man, I've spoken to other men about this. So I think one thing we men resent is when it's expected of us versus coming from a place of generosity. And it's just a sad facet of this dynamic we live in. Now, I could say men expect sex, and that's a different level of expectation. But certainly, given that this conversation is about money, how does I want to just expand upon expectations a little bit based on that story, and I'd love to hear your thoughts.
It's so interesting. And I think we need to remain open that we're all very different people.
Okay.
My girls are 20 and 22 this year, and they both are dating, and they both date just like you described. My girls, after watching my husband and I, they both earn money. They go to college. They earn some of their own money, and they go out on dates. And I regularly hear them say, "Oh, I took them out tonight," or "I treated tonight," or I took him ice cream. He just brought me flowers last week." And it's not a tit for tat. It's a deep appreciation of how well they're being treated, meaning they want to treat too. They want to feel how good it feels to take care of somebody else. So whether it's money or something else, we show love and appreciation in different ways. Acts of service, paying for your drink, or bringing, stopping and getting some ice cream before you went over to visit for a movie night because you wanted to treat ice cream. And I've seen my girls do things like that. If somebody in a relationship, and I hear from women all the time, if they really feel that they want the man to take care of everything, that they should, that's how they were raised, and that's their expectation. And I don't want to take anything away from that either. But I will submit to you that one of the things, and this has nothing to do with money, but it's still an exchange. After 37 years with my husband, he still brings me a cup of coffee in the morning. And that's a big thing, because I'm up early. He'll come up with a hot cup of coffee. If I even have gone to work out, he still has my hot cup of coffee. He will track me when I'm working out to know when I walk through the house. So I have a hot cup of coffee, and I can make my own coffee, by the way. I could stop somewhere and get a coffee, but it's such a generous, loving act that he does for me. It makes me want to do other things for him. And I cook most nights for him, and I love it. So there's different things after all of these years, acts of service that we do for each other. And in our life, my work, my contribution financially to the family has been an act of love as well. My husband actually really appreciated having a partner earning, but we made that decision together. And if the decision in the couple is that one person or the other, man or woman, is going to be the primary and earn the money, you just need to have a conversation,
Yes.
responsibilities,
Yeah.
and who's going to handle what. I think we get in trouble always when we expect or demand without conversation, meaning that
Yeah.
I need to have a cup of coffee every morning. I needed to be there. You need to track me on my tracker. And when I show up, you need to hand me a cup of coffee because that's what I'm worth. I'm your wife.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it wouldn't have the beautiful, sweet meaning that that coffee has for me every single morning because it's an act of love. Then it's an expectation. So I think and this is my opinion, you all may not agree with me, but I
Yeah.
think we need to be very careful with our expectations. And I think that sometimes we find our own self-worth through those expectations. We think that we're only worth it if somebody will do that for us. And I
Yeah.
think that has more to do with your lack of self-esteem around worth than the other person. Now, you as a couple can make a decision together and play different roles. One may play the earning role, one may keep the household together. There's lots of things we can do. But if you expect somebody to always pay, to always provide, without having that conversation, it's
Actually, I literally, right before you began sharing that piece, I wrote down the word agreeing to.
yeah.
So Shannon, real quick, I would just want to open it up for questions right now. For those who are watching, if you have a question, there's a little chat box in the corner. Write the word question, then post the question thereafter, or you can purchase a super sticker, super chat. All of the monies from the super sticker, super chat goes to a scholarship fund in the name of my son, Connor Asley. That's a picture of him there with his brother and I. He's my son who passed away over 6.5 years ago. In his honor, we donate to causes like the Hoffman Process, Insight Institute, and scholarships to coaching as well. Our goal tonight is $50, so we'd appreciate some love. Speaking of money, but it's a donation. Again, and there's a little dollar sign in the chat box. So Shannon, we have Trista who's written an interesting question. I'll read it out loud. She says, what are your thoughts on women giving their card money to a man for him to pay versus her paying directly? By the way, I have a story to share on this, but I would like to hear your thoughts first.
Chris, just a great question. I think it has to do with the dynamic between you and your partner. If your partner feels like you're taking away some of his masculine power, if you're handing the card out in public, I think it's a great way to do it. Again, it comes down to communication. And if you know, and women, we're smart, men, you're smart. If your partner has said, I love it when you do that, but when you hand the card in front of other people in public, I feel like I'm being judged. Absolutely. Find a different way to do it. We have to honor each other's needs. And if somebody tells you that need, I would say, oh my goodness, thank you for telling me. Let's find a different way of doing this. So I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, so I actually have two personal stories to share on that. I actually, when I went through this crash in my life, where I lost my job, the divorce, and everything, and I'm going to be candid, dating was one of my drugs of choice. There was this hole that was being filled in the process of just talking to people well, this is before we did video chats and stuff, but talking online and that sort of thing. And I dated a senior vice president of a pharmaceutical company. I mean, she was a high net worth earner. Yeah. And she knew where I was at, and and she liked me. I think she used the term, you show up with emotional currency, which stuck with me. You show up in a different form of currency because you show up very emotionally mature and that sort of thing, and you're a good communicator. I mean, she didn't point blank say it like that, but she would hand me her credit card before we walked into a restaurant, and we used her money, but I was physically handing the card. Mm-hmm. Fast forward some years later, I met a woman who was worth like $50 million. Mm-hmm. And there was like a gigantic disparity, but she enjoyed my company and everything. The same thing happened. And I didn't feel emasculated at it. I wanted to be careful, though. I'll be candid with you. I kind of have I don't want to use the word morality button, but there's a pride button in me that wouldn't allow me to take, in a way. Like, I didn't operate from a place of taking advantage of someone or anything. It was a conversation that we had. And it's just because in public, she would have preferred, both cases, they preferred that it's a little bit more the masculine thing.
Yeah.
Now, I've had other women who have, hey, they've whipped out their credit card on a date because I took, like the one I was telling you about before. She treated one time, I treated the next time. But Trista, I just want you to know, I experienced that. And in my case, it didn't emasculate me.
Yeah. It's interesting. As you're talking, Jonathan, there are nights, because my husband and I have been together so long, our money is all together. We have
Yeah.
and we carry the same credit card. So I have to stop myself sometimes when the bill comes, if we're sitting with friends, because I always put my hands and let my husband throw the card down, even though it's our card. So I do think about it. I do not, because society judges us so much. If we're in a dinner, like with another couple or something, even if it's just the two of us, I'll always wait for him to pull the card out.
Okay, interesting.
It would be the same if I pulled my card out, but we've never talked about it, which is interesting. But I do wait to give him the opportunity so I don't pre-jump over him.
Well, this, just a story occurred to me. It's something I asked years ago, and I watched I was at dinner once and I saw a husband and wife. I believe they were husband and wife, and I later confirmed it. And she took out her credit card and paid. And I was bold and I interrupted myself and asked a question about it.
Yeah.
And we end up having a conversation, and she says, "Oh, she's in charge of the money in the house. She just takes care of it all." Yeah. And it was an interesting bit of awareness for me, because it wasn't this whole masculine and feminine conversation. It was just, hey, I'm the breadwinner. She just takes care of the bills. I don't want to think about it. He goes, I don't want to. He almost doesn't even know how to write a check, is the way he described it. And that's a little bit of an exaggeration.
Yeah.
And so I think part of the stigma we have to get, I think, as a society, and again, like you said earlier, you have to do what's right for you. But it'd be nice that we took away all that judgment and stigma around money, particularly from that masculine, feminine perspective.
It doesn't serve us. I mean, it's like any other judgment that we do. We make assumptions about people most of the time that are not true. And yet we've got these standards that we feel that, that people will judge us if we do one thing or another. And I just told you, I sit on my hands and let him pull out the card.
Yeah.
Truth be told, I'm a portfolio manager. I've been doing it for 13 years. I manage all the money. I buy the stocks, the bonds. I do the trades. I do all of that. Now, thank goodness Chris pays the bills. Otherwise, the bill would never get paid, because I'm so busy that I would let the thing go to 40, 60 days and went, oh my gosh, the bill hasn't been paid. So we really leaned into our strengths. But it took time for us to talk through and catch our groove on things. I don't even know if Chris knows that sometimes I won't pull my car out quickly. But as a woman, I don't want to go in front of him in public. And I think, why do I do that? And it's the first time I've said it out loud, is probably, I don't want society to judge me, because most of our friends know that I have a fairly successful job, as overstepping my husband financially.
But don't you? I mean, but okay. And I could, not that I want to get debated on that, but I think at some point we just got to say, you know what, this is what I'm doing, and it's okay, kind of thing. Let's throw away the pretense and all of that sort of thing. We've got another. Let's see. Sassy writes, I don't know if this is a question, but I wanted to read it. I don't expect anything from a guy. I only want a guy to pay or do something if that's what he wants to do from his heart. I offer to pay since it has to be a team effort. That's how I roll.
Yep.
By the way, I just want as a man, I appreciate that, Sassy. I like that it comes from a conscious place. And it's almost as if that woman I was sharing the story that treated, in a way, what she said to me, especially when she said, I want to do this for you because I think you're worth it. I felt like that came from her heart. Like it really felt like from a heartfelt place. And so that's the way I think we should view every aspect of a relationship, as coming from our heart. And again, outside of those expectations.
I think it comes down to, as I was talking about with my daughters doing small things, not only do we want to be able to give to other people and to give to our partners and the people we're dating or married to,
Yeah.
um, we also need to allow them to give to us, because those
Mm,
gifts of paying for something or bringing the coffee or doing something that we need to be, in my opinion, we need to be careful not to be so in charge that we don't allow the other person to gift as well, because it feels so good to be the one that's being to provide something as well. So we do need to remain open. And what I will tell you that I'm seeing more and more of in my office
okay.
is women executives that are way out earning their husbands, and some of the husbands that are stepping back and taking care of kids full time.
Yeah.
And it is a dynamic that is becoming more common in the last 10 years. After 30 years, I didn't see this earlier in my career. In fact, earlier in my career, I had a lot of men sit down and go, "Oh, you're a woman," because I have a unisex name. I don't know if I
Yeah.
can work with a woman with my money. Like I went through all of that. But now more and more, I've got a lot of top CEO. I've got several CEO women that I work with, that men are holding the home front down, taking care of kids, maybe doing some writing on the side. And they love it. They love being married to this a woman who provides at that level. So I'm hoping, Jonathan, some of the stereotypes and what we expect to see in a restaurant, a man pulling out a card, a woman pulling out a card. Why is this even a conversation? Why do we even need to think about it? It's between the couple that's sitting there. It doesn't matter to society who's pulling out the credit card. But yet it does. Like I said,
Well, but I think it comes back to those scars and wounds and
yeah,
scripts that we were raised in. I mean, whether it's our socioeconomic status, as our culture, our society, there's so many scripts and stories around this. And again, and what I do as a coach, particularly, is I'm drawing attention to this conversation. I want to bring it back to those money scars, if you will,
yep.
because I know I have lots of scars centered around money. I mean, and many of them, or the scripts they weren't written by me. They were written by my parents that were passed down to me. And believe me, I butt up against those scripts or scars. And I found myself in circumstances where I'm like, oh, I went, like I might have taken someone at a restaurant that was probably outside of my league, kind of thing. And I know later I felt uncomfortable
Mhm.
in that circumstance, but I didn't want to tell this person that. And it was something that ate up inside of me.
Yep.
And I'm here to encourage authentic, transparent, vulnerable communication. And I think money is one of those things. If 1/3 of relationships end because of this, well, then I think it should be in our consciousness from the very first date to some degree.
No, I agree. I actually think it's one of those early on, once you've established that there's something going on here, that there may be some longer term interest, money needs to be discussed. In fact, I've got 10 different things that I think that need to be discussed by a couple, but really money transparency, how you feel about money, how you operate with money, your money wounds, what you learn growing up, because money wounds and scar tissue prevent us sometimes from truly aligning our money with what we want and
Yeah.
achieving what we want ultimately. And if you're coming together with somebody in a partnership, at some point you're going to decide how to spend money, whether it be on a nicer dinner, or are you taking trips, or are you doing this, or are you doing that. And even if money is kept separate, it's the second marriage or first marriage, whatever. I have lots of first marriages that don't combine their money. Um,
Yeah.
but there's typically decisions that are being made as a couple on how money is going to be spent. That transparency is important. The other piece of it is, I find there's a lot of money infidelity that happens.
Oh, infidelity. Bum, bum,
Infidelity.
bum.
Yeah, yeah, a lot of money infidelity. And what I mean by that is
Okay.
that, Jonathan, if you and I are not transparent with how we want to spend money, and I'll just go at it from a woman's point of view.
Okay.
Jonathan, I love clothes. I do. And it's crazy for somebody who's a financial person, but I grew up, my niece is a fairly famous designer. I notice clothes. I love clothes. I spend money on clothes.
Okay.
I would probably hide my clothes spending if I had a husband who looked at me every time and said, "Oh, is that new? How much was that? Did you really need that?" So my husband knows that I spend money on clothes. I freely let him know. The packages came through the front door. I'm not hiding in the back. I didn't take the kids to the mall when they little. I've got 2 girls and say, "Okay, you got new dresses, hide them from daddy." We came in, we showed daddy, we owned at all. He pays the credit card bills. So he
Yeah.
knows exactly what I'm spending. And so that is something that if you create an environment where you're not talking about money goals, and I know it sounds silly. I know this is
Yeah.
silly to talk about clothes, but that's why I'm talking about it, because we all have different areas of things we enjoy in our lives that may feel frivolous,
Yeah.
but there's something we enjoy. And it is I just saw someone say it's a guilty pleasure. I
Yeah.
clothes. But what I will tell you is that if we're lying and hiding and not telling the truth about it, anything that we're not telling the truth about in our dating and relationship lives
Yeah.
creates distance and crevices and problems in a relationship. And that's why marriages don't make it, because they don't talk about it, they lie about it, they hide it. Men hide things too. I've seen it on both sides of the thing. They've spent, how many days playing golf and they didn't tell
I
the
was
wife.
just about to say, I used to in my marriage. I
Yeah,
played a lot of golf. I would package it as part of my business, which to some degree it really was.
yeah,
But I had my own money infidelity at that point in time. Something else occurs to me, a different type of infidelity is when there's like this catastrophic experience, like maybe a job loss or financial shift. And all of a sudden and when I say infidelity, a fear of sharing
yeah.
because this is going to potentially disrupt our entire lives. And okay, put that in a box for a second, because we are dealing with it. My demographic is in midlife, which I say is after baby making years and before retirement. By the way, I want to give props to Kathy Canada, who just gave us a $20 super sticker. Thank you for the love. We appreciate you. Um, you know, oh shoot, I just lost my train of thought. What did I say?
We were talking about in our midlife and
Yeah. Oh,
okay.
well, you mentioned second marriage, and it occurs to me that now with so many people experiencing divorce and now being in the dating marketplace in their 40s, 50s, with two people with maybe unique lifestyles for each one of them, have you noticed, I mean, from your practice or anything, have you noticed how they've navigated those conversations? It's one thing when you're in your 20s building a life together, or your 30s building a life together, but what about those that are in their 50s and 60s that have fully curated lives? Do you
Oh,
get
John,
involved with that?
we every day. Oh, Jonathan, we need another hour for that one. But let me
Okay, okay,
give you the highlights of it. So
okay.
bottom line is the emotional side of it. As you're bringing two households together, you have to talk through. There needs to be prenuptial agreements. I know this is not sexy and fun, but you need to talk about exactly how you're going to bring households together and how money is going to work. It gets more complicated when you have children or aging parents that you're helping take care of as well in this equation. And the values of where you're going to spend the money is really important. Then the question is that if you died, so Jonathan, let's say you and I are a second marriage and we
Okay.
get married and you've got your son, I've got two girls, we come together, our spouses have died, and now we're bringing the houses together. What if I die? My assets, the assets I had originally with my husband, I want to go to my kids. But let's say you sold your house and you're living in my house. Do my
Yeah.
kids kick you out of the house once I'm gone, but you're going to live another 10 years?
Yeah.
So estate planning, how you're going to handle the households is critical. And then you've got to take it to the next generation and have a family meeting to make sure as you bring these families together, everybody's on the same page. So as I said, I just gave you a
Oh,
high.
can I tell you, you might get a kick out of this. So, a couple of years ago, I was in a relationship and I just moved in with somebody. And our arrangement was I covered about 2/3 of the household expenses. She covered a third. And I was going on a trip to the Virgin Islands with the guys, kind of a guys trip. And we had just moved in together. And I had this weird panic attack. What if something, whenever I travel, I always worry. I kind of do the Chicken Little. I worry about the worst things that happen. And I called and I called my attorney to want to make a quick little change to my will, but it was too late to do that. But God forbid something happens to me. I was like, I'd want her to get taken care of for 6 months. Well, I called my son, he gets everything anyway.
Yeah.
I only have one person that gets everything in my life or my case. Um, and I said, look, I'm counting on you to, and I told her all about it. She goes, I don't need it. But she appreciated that I had the forethought to even think about something like that. Um, And obviously, because I deeply cared for this person, and while that relationship didn't work out eventually, it was a thought that ran through my mind because I thought I wouldn't want to burden someone in that particular case.
And that's where it's more complicated, but it makes it even more important to talk about all the details and the other family members involved. And what if the plane goes down? What if the two of you guys are together and the plane goes down? And what
Yeah.
if one of you dies a week before the other person? And so it is there's so many things. The other question is your aging, and I'm just going to throw it out on the table here.
Okay.
So now you're midlife, all right, and
Yeah.
you're going into retirement. And how well have you saved for retirement? And then what if one of you gets sick and needs long-term care or has dementia or other things? And there is an enormous amount of things to talk about that are not fun,
Yeah.
money, and as we age. And as mature dating people going into our next phase of our lives together, if you're not talking about how that's going to be handled, and it's not just the two of you, if you still have parents living, how are you dealing with that?
Oh God.
Because I know that there is a dynamic with a lot of couples. It's been dynamic in our family of a lack of money, of parents, and then caregiving coming back to the adult children. And if you're coming together and that pushes a stress on the current marriage because you're caregiving for an older generation before we even get into possibly needing care.
Yeah.
So I know that I'm probably throwing, water on, a fire here, but I do think that these types of things are not sexy, but they are sexy. I mean, having a conversation about here's all the things that we could go through together. How are we going to handle them? Because you will cross that bridge. My husband and I have had job transitions that have been unexpected. We've had to take care of aging parents together.
Yeah.
And we've had some pretty tragic things happen. But because we've talked about money all along, we already knew we were on the same page. It doesn't mean it was comfortable because there have been some really lean and really hard years. But we knew going into it that we had the communication to figure it out together. And the values that we were going to do. We were going to help one of our parents, my husband's mom. We were going to help her regardless of whatever happened. And I was in. So having those conversations to me is really sexy because you're on the same page.
No, I this is something on my consciousness on a regular basis. This is going to sound terrible, but I don't have enough money to die.
Yeah.
Meaning I mean, at the lifestyle that I'm currently living, I'd have to, I always jokingly say, if I need to, I'll just move to Bali, where you could live, for a fraction of living. And we live in a pretty area of Southern California that's pretty high rent, so to speak.
Really high rent.
But that plays a factor even in my dating life, in my relationship life. And again, I believe in radical transparency. If two people are going to explore a relationship together, I think they should have a conversation. Bella just posted a question. And by the way, everybody's loving this, Shannon. So I just want you to know the comments coming in. They're loving what you have to share. What if we have a discussion and there's an agreement, but one spouse decides to change it on their own? This happened to me. Well, that's the power play we were talking about.
And Bella, it happens all the time. And it can be power, but it can be, so often we can talk hypothetically, but until we're actually in the situation and we feel the pain and the pressure of that situation, our own scars come up and we can react differently than we actually said we were going to act initially. Meaning that
Oh, really?
Yes, because so what if you agree on if somebody loses their job, then, I'm going to go back to work or we're going to do this, but you lose your job and, somebody looks at you and goes, well, you lost your job. Why did you lose your job? I was counting you. I don't want to go back to work, but you said you would step in if we needed to. Well, I don't want to now. So people do change their minds. They agree to do things, but when the rubber meets the road, sometimes people just can't do them. And sometimes they can't do it because they have unexplored scar tissue or they were comfortable and they didn't want to be uncomfortable. I've seen this a couple of times. I had a couple that they were married midlife. He was very, very successful, had a very successful business. And she really did not want to work. She really wanted to take care of her and he really wanted to do it. He ended up in a lawsuit and lost everything.
Mm.
And when they were dating, she had said, I know how successful you are, but if anything happens, I've got a law degree. I'll go back to work. I'll step up. I'll step in. Well, it happened. And
Yeah.
she decided, no way. I just said that to get into the marriage. But the reality is you're not, she literally said sitting across from me, you're not sexy to me anymore. You don't have the
Yeah.
money. So I'm out of here. So Bella, it happens all the time. It's really hard when it happens when you're up against a wall, when you've agreed to take care of a family member or something else. And one of the spouses says, well, wait a minute, I told you I'd step in and help you with your mom. But now that we're actually having to do it, it's uncomfortable. We can't take a trip this year, so I'm not in. Yeah, that's human reaction.
It's interesting in midlife, we see a lot of people that are keeping their own homes. They're partially because a lot of people realize they don't necessarily live well together, but they can have a good relationship in separate homes. But one of the benefits of merging assets, merging, homes and such like that, is that you get to reduce your expenses. And I think, and I'm curious, well, you may not be familiar with this. It's called living apart together. This is a kind of a trend that's happening where couples are having their two separate homes. But I wonder, in other words, there's two separate homes. They're in fully committed relationships with one another, but they're keeping their autonomy, which on some level, I actually, ascribe to that.
Mm-hmm.
But I also wonder if that puts a different burden on the relationship. Maybe at age 50 it isn't a big deal, but it might end up being a bigger deal at 70 or 80 if we get to that bracket. I just wonder if you have a thought on that.
No, I actually have several clients that are doing that. I didn't realize that was kind of a movement, but you do see with second marriages where they raise their kids in a home that they really love being in. After I've seen both men and women caregive till death for spouses, and then they're dating, but they just kind of want to have some freedom to live in their own house and just starfish in bed and not have to worry about anybody else, but have a nice travel partner or somebody to spend time with. And so again, it comes down to resources. As you age, each person in that relationship should have a plan for how you're going to age. Every one of us, nobody comes into my office and says, Shannon, I want dementia. I want dementia. I want Alzheimer's. I don't remember anything. I want somebody to take care of me and feed me and change me and all this stuff. Nobody wants to go there. We don't know where we're going. So we have to assume that every couple that I've seen, the average is about 70%. One or the other person is going to need some level of caregiving for some period of time in that relationship once you hit 70 plus. And you don't know who it's going to be. So whether you're living together or apart, there needs to be a plan, not only a physical, but a financial plan. And part of the physical plan needs to be an agreement of what you're going to do. I've seen the healthy person literally die before the sick person because they're killing themselves trying to take care of somebody. Or being impoverished because they used every dime they could to take care of the person while they were alive. So that's, again, radical transparency. You need to talk through a plan for all of these things.
Well, I know when my parents, they had no plan whatsoever. Thankfully, they had enough of a nest egg. But and what was interesting, my mother passed away at 88. My dad was 92, and he lived 7 more years. And we as a family had no plan of how to navigate this. And he became kind of, I don't want to use the word burden, but a challenge to take care of. We eventually put him in, or he went into an assisted living facility. By the way, I'm going to share something you probably never heard of before. You might have heard me share that my heritage is Turkish. Well, my father moved back to Istanbul, Turkey, moved into a high-end assisted living facility. It's a one-time donation. Because he was 92, it was $250,000.
Yeah.
Okay. That actually, he lived 7 years there.
Wow.
It would have easily, that would have cost us almost $700,000 or $800,000 if it was in the United States.
Easily. It's about $160,000 a year.
Yeah. And we never planned for this as a family. We were naive to this.
Yeah.
And I think why I draw attention to this, because dating is hyper focused on entertainment and romance. It's all the pleasure. Let's get as much pleasure out of this experience. But it's these nitty gritty conversations that will eventually make or break a relationship.
Yeah.
And I believe I'd rather have some of these conversations, these deeper conversations, much earlier on versus finding out later when your heart is once you almost too invested to kind of make a different choice.
Well, and let me be really clear. Part of being able to sit behind the closed doors
Yeah.
is I recently had a client
Okay.
who is in her early mid to 50s. Her husband was about 10 years older than she.
Okay.
And he worked for the state of California.
Okay.
And for decades had a very good pension. They got married later. This was a second marriage for both of them. She was the one who didn't want to get married. She's like, I don't need your money. I make my own money, so forth. But they were living together for a long time. Finally, he kept coming to her. And so I just said, listen, he wants to marry you. His social security is going to be much higher than yours. And if you're married to him for a couple of years, something happens to him, you get a higher social security. There's no downside for you at this point. I mean, if you don't want to marry him, don't marry him, but there's some upside for you. And of course, we're
Okay.
all in a meeting, you should marry him. So, and then once they were married, he said, because the pension through California could only be given to a spouse, meaning not the kids. She wasn't taking anything away from the kids, but he needed to go back to the pension system and then say that I've been remarried and the pension and so forth. And he had to submit it to the pension. There's a window of time he can do that in.
Okay.
And he said he did all of that and was all taken care of. And so she started giving up some of her, some of the savings that she was spending on the family. Like they started bringing things together.
Okay.
Well, fast forward in the last couple, in the last 7 months, he ended up dying earlier than thought from cancer. He never made it to the pension group. He never changed the pension. So the pension just poof. There's nothing there. And his sons came in. It's a dual marriage and cleaned out several $100,000 of a savings account that was there. So she is now in a position where she said, I never asked him. I never followed up. I never made sure it was done, Shannon. And he sat in my office and I promise you that he was intent. He loved her. He wanted to do this to make sure she was taken care of. And so it's the lack of follow through and conversation. And then she ended up feeling very foolish afterwards because she knew all she had to do was say, hey, did you get over there? Did you get it done? So it's this follow up in these conversations, but it's so much like anything that we do. People don't want to go get their estate plan done because if you talk about it, oh my goodness, then it could really happen. Well, I'm telling you right now, it happens whether you go get the estate plan or not. And when it's done, it's almost, I don't know. I was raised by an oral surgeon. So it's like brushing and flossing your teeth every day. You make sure you floss 2 or 3 times a day. You always feel like I'm doing the right thing for myself. These conversations are hard, but once you get through them and once you have expectations and they're set and you've got the documents in place and everything is done, you feel like an adult, like I've taken care of business. And the other piece of it is most of us that reach, and I love that you're saying that we're middle-aged here, Jonathan. I'm 58 years old. If that's middle age, yahoo.
Yeah.
But at this point, if, putting all of that in order is like putting a bow on the final gift for our families, for our loved ones, for our children, for our extended families. When we leave things in a mess, let me tell you, it's a mess financially. It takes years to get through it. I know. I do it with clients all the time that leave things in a mess. And so I'm helping this woman now clean up the pieces and rebuild her financial life in her mid 60s that she didn't need to. If this one piece had been done, she would have had enough income for the rest of her life.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm sure there's story after story after story with
that. Oh my gosh. Hours.
Okay, Shannon, first off, for everyone watching, I just want you to know there's this TED Talk you have to watch that Shannon has on her Instagram page, which I'll post a link to connect with her Instagram. It's about money, wounds, and scars. It's what caused me to reach out to you. You have a book that's coming out. Do you mind showing the pre-cover to everyone?
It's called Your Money Has Feelings. It'll be out September.
Okay. Your Money Has Feelings. Be on the lookout for it. It's going to be out in about 4 or 5 months, give or take. Shannon, it's been a true pleasure to have you on. I really appreciate this conversation. This is important stuff. It's touchy stuff, but you made it so much easier, I believe, by putting attention to it.
Thank you. Thanks for the time. This has been great, Jonathan.
Yeah, and we've got a lot of great comments. So everyone, Just I want to say thank you for watching. If you have any questions or if you want to connect with Shannon, again, there'll be a link to her Instagram page. You can follow her there. You can be on the lookout for her book. I want to thank Shannon once again and wish you all a super duper wonderful evening. Be well. Thanks. Bye-bye now. Bye. Bye.